The bride stood shivering on the wooden platform of the San Angelo train station in Tom Green County, Texas, her white dress fluttering against her thin frame like a ghost preparing to take flight. And Austin Sawyer knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. It was November 1884, and the evening air had turned bitter cold as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the dusty streets in shades of amber and crimson. Austin had just finished loading supplies onto his wagon when he noticed her, standing alone with no luggage, no companion, nothing but the elaborate wedding dress that seemed far too fine for this rough frontier town. Her dark hair had been pinned up in an intricate style that was already coming undone, loose strands whipping across her pale face. Even from a distance, he could see her trembling. Austin was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of working cattle ranches across West Texas. His hands were calloused, his face sun-weathered, but his eyes held a kindness that his rugged appearance might have suggested he lacked. He had come into town to pick up feed and wire for the ranch where he worked, the Double R spread about 10 miles north of San Angelo. The ranch belonged to Robert Richardson, a fair man who treated his hired hands with respect, a rarity in these parts. Without thinking too much about it, Austin grabbed his leather jacket from the wagon seat and walked toward the woman. She did not seem to notice him approaching, her gaze fixed on the empty railroad tracks stretching east toward the darkening horizon. As he got closer, he could hear her teeth chattering. "Madam," he said softly, not wanting to startle her, "you look like you could use this." She turned to look at him, and he found himself staring into the most haunting eyes he had ever seen. They were a deep brown, almost black in the fading light, and they held an emptiness that made his chest tighten. She looked at the jacket he was offering, then back at his face. "Warmth feels like a distant memory," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but she did not reach for the jacket. Austin stood there for a moment, unsure what to say to such a statement. He could see now that she was young, probably around his own age or a few years younger. Her face was beautiful despite the obvious exhaustion, and something else he could not quite name. Defeat, maybe, or resignation. "Well, memories or not, this will help keep the chill off," he said, stepping closer and gently draping the jacket over her shoulders. It was far too big for her, swallowing her small frame, but she pulled it tight around herself almost instinctively. "Thank you," she murmured, still not meeting his eyes again. "You waiting for someone?" Austin asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She laughed then, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. "I was supposed to be. I traveled all the way from Charleston, South Carolina, 3 weeks on trains and stage coaches to marry a man I had only corresponded with through letters. Vernon Hartley. Do you know him?" Austin felt his jaw tighten. He knew Vernon Hartley, all right. The man owned a small ranch on the outskirts of town, and he had a reputation for drinking, gambling, and treating women poorly. Austin had seen him in the saloons more than once, bragging about the beautiful bride he had coming from back east, purchased through some kind of mail-order arrangement. "I know him," Austin said carefully. "Well, he changed his mind, apparently. His lawyer met me at the station an hour ago and informed me that Mr. Hartley has decided to pursue other interests. The lawyer gave me $20 and said it should be enough to get me back east, though we both know it is not nearly sufficient." She finally looked at Austin again, and he could see tears glistening in her eyes, though she was clearly fighting to keep them from falling. "So here I stand, in a town I do not know, wearing a wedding dress for a ceremony that will never happen, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to." Austin felt anger building in his chest, not at this woman but at Vernon Hartley and men like him who treated people as though they were commodities to be bought and discarded on a whim. He had seen plenty of injustice in his years on the frontier, but something about this particular cruelty struck him deeply. "What's your name?" he asked. "Victoria Ashford," she said. "Though I suppose it hardly matters now." "It matters," Austin said firmly. "Miss Ashford, I am Austin Sawyer, and I work at the Double R Ranch north of here. I cannot speak to what brought you to San Angelo or what you have been through, but I can tell you that no one deserves to be treated the way Hartley has treated you. Now, it is getting dark and cold, and that train station bench is not fit for anyone to spend the night on. Let me take you to the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable place, and she will give you a room and a hot meal." Victoria shook her head. "I cannot afford a boarding house, Mr. Sawyer. The $20 I have must last until I can figure out what to do next." "Did I say anything about you paying?" Austin asked. "Let me worry about that. You just worry about getting warm and getting some food in you. You look like you have not eaten properly in days." "I cannot accept charity from a stranger," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction, and Austin could see how close she was to collapsing from exhaustion and cold. "Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as basic human decency, something Vernon Hartley clearly knows nothing about." He offered her his arm. "Please, Miss Ashford, let me help." For a long moment she just looked at him, as though trying to determine whether he was genuine or if this was some kind of trick. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, because she finally nodded and took his arm. Her hand was ice cold even through his shirt sleeve. Austin guided her to his wagon and helped her up onto the seat. She moved stiffly, as though her body was struggling to obey her commands. He grabbed a blanket from the back and tucked it around her legs before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. The boarding house was only a few blocks away on the main street. Mrs. Patterson was a widow in her 50s who had been running the establishment for the past decade. She was known for being fair but firm, and she did not tolerate any nonsense from her boarders. When Austin knocked on the door, she answered quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern when she saw Victoria in her wedding dress. "Mercy, Mrs. Patterson breathed. "What happened here?" "Long story," Austin said. "Can you put Miss Ashford up for a few nights? I will cover the cost." Mrs. Patterson did not ask questions. She simply opened the door wider and beckoned Victoria inside. "Come in, dear. You look frozen half to death. I will get some hot water for a bath, and then we will get some food into you." Victoria glanced back at Austin, and for the first time he saw something other than emptiness in her eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or maybe just relief at finding a small measure of kindness in this harsh place. "Thank you, Mr. Sawyer," she said quietly. "Austin," he corrected. "And you are welcome. I will check on you tomorrow if that is all right." She nodded, and then Mrs. Patterson was ushering her inside, already calling out orders to her hired girl about heating water and preparing a tray of food. Austin stood on the porch for a moment after the door closed, then made his way back to his wagon. It was getting late, and he still had supplies to deliver to the ranch, but his mind was not on his work. It was on the woman with the haunting eyes who had said that warmth felt like a distant memory. The ride back to the Double R Ranch took Austin nearly an hour in the dark. The temperature had dropped even further, and he found himself shivering without his jacket. He did not regret giving it to Victoria, though. Something about her had struck a chord deep within him, and he could not shake the image of her standing alone on that platform, abandoned and adrift. When he finally pulled the wagon up to the ranch house, he was met by Jack Morris, one of the other ranch hands. Jack was in his 40s, a grizzled cowboy who had been working ranches since he was a boy. He helped Austin unload the supplies and put the horses away. "You are late," Jack observed. "Everything all right?" Had to help someone in town, Austin said. He did not elaborate, and Jack did not push. That was one of the things Austin appreciated about working at the Double R. People respected each other's privacy. The bunkhouse was warm when Austin finally made it inside. There were 6 hands working the ranch right now, preparing for the winter months ahead. They were a good group of men, mostly quiet and hardworking. Austin ate a cold supper from the pot that had been left on the stove, then lay down on his bunk, but sleep did not come easily. He kept thinking about Victoria and what she must be feeling right now. To travel so far, to uproot her entire life based on promises made in letters, only to be rejected upon arrival, it was cruel beyond measure. The next morning, Austin was up before dawn as always. There were cattle to check on, fences to mend, and a dozen other tasks that needed attention. But as the day wore on, he found his thoughts drifting back to San Angelo and the boarding house. He had promised to check on Victoria, and he was a man who kept his promises. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Austin asked Robert Richardson if he could ride into town. The ranch owner, a solid man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes, agreed without asking questions. Austin saddled his horse, a dependable bay mare named Lucy, and made the ride to San Angelo as the evening turned the sky purple and gold. Mrs. Patterson answered his knock with a knowing smile. "I wondered if you would show up," she said. "Miss Ashford is in the parlor. She has been reading most of the day, trying to distract herself, I think." Austin found Victoria sitting in a chair by the window, a book open in her lap. She had changed out of the wedding dress and now wore a simple gray dress that Mrs. Patterson must have lent her. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, and he saw that some of the color had returned to her face. "Austin," she said, and he noticed she had taken his invitation to use his first name. "I did not expect to see you again." "I said I would check on you," he replied, taking off his hat. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday," she admitted. "Mrs. Patterson has been incredibly kind. She fed me enough food last night to sustain a small army, and the bed was the most comfortable thing I have experienced in weeks." She paused, her fingers playing with the corner of the book. "I have been thinking about what to do next. I need to find work enough to save money for passage back east. Do you know of anyone in town who might be hiring?" Austin sat down in the chair across from her. "What kind of work can you do?" "I can read and write, obviously. I had 3 years of formal schooling and then tutors after that. I can keep books, do figures. I can sew, though not as well as a professional seamstress. I can cook, clean, tend to children." She sighed. "In Charleston, I helped my aunt run a boarding house not unlike this one after my parents died. That is how I met the woman who told me about the mail-order bride opportunities out west. She said it was a chance for a fresh start, a new life. And you wanted that, a fresh start." Victoria looked out the window at the darkening street. "My parents died of yellow fever when I was 17. I went to live with my aunt, but she had 6 children of her own and limited resources. I was a burden, though she tried not to make me feel that way. When I turned 23, I decided it was time to make my own way. The idea of coming west, of marrying and starting a family, it seemed like a good option, better than becoming a spinster dependent on my relatives' charity." She turned back to him, and there was a fierceness in her eyes now. "But I will not return to that dependency. I will make my own way here, even if it takes months to earn enough to go back." Austin respected her determination, even as he wondered if she truly understood how difficult it would be for a single woman to find respectable work in a rough frontier town like San Angelo. "I might have an idea," he said slowly. "The ranch where I work, the Double R, The owner's wife has been looking for help around the house. She is a good woman, fair and kind, but she has been struggling since her daughter moved to Dallas. The work would be cooking, cleaning, some laundry. It is hard work, but the pay would be decent and you would have room and board included. Victoria's eyes widened. Do you truly think she would consider hiring me? I can ask, Austin said. I cannot make any promises, but Mrs. Richardson is a reasonable woman. If I vouch for you, I think she would at least meet with you. You barely know me, Victoria pointed out. Why would you vouch for me? It was a fair question, and Austin took a moment to consider his answer. Because I believe people deserve a chance to prove themselves. Because what happened to you was wrong, and if I can help set it right in some small way, I want to do that. He met her eyes. And because I have a feeling you are someone worth knowing, Miss Ashford. A faint blush colored her cheeks, the first real color he had seen in her face. Please call me Victoria. Victoria, then, he said, and found that he liked the way her name sounded. They talked for another hour, and Austin learned more about her life in Charleston. She spoke of her parents with obvious affection, describing a childhood that had been happy until fever had taken them both within days of each other. She had been thrust into adulthood too quickly, forced to navigate a world that had little patience for young women without means or protection. Her aunt had done her best, but there were simply too many mouths to feed. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like an answer to prayers she had been afraid to voice. I knew there were risks, Victoria admitted. I knew that Vernon might not be exactly as he described himself in his letters, but I never imagined he would simply abandon the agreement entirely. The lawyer said Vernon had met someone else, a saloon girl with a dowry her previous husband left her. Apparently, my lack of money made me less appealing than what was promised. The bitterness in her voice was understandable, and Austin felt his anger at Vernon hardly rising again. His loss, Austin said firmly. Any man who would judge a woman's worth by her bank account is not worth having. Victoria smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face. You are a kind man, Austin Sawyer. I hope you know that. I just try to do right by people, he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious under her gaze, when he finally left the boarding house that night, promising to speak with Mrs. Richardson the next day. Austin felt something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of purpose that went beyond the daily routines of ranch work. He had spent years drifting from one job to another, never quite finding a place that felt like home. But the thought of helping Victoria, of seeing her smile again, made him feel as though he was finally doing something that mattered. True to his word, Austin spoke with Mrs. Richardson the following morning. Elizabeth Richardson was a woman of about 50, with graying blonde hair and a warm demeanor that put people at ease. She listened carefully as Austin explained Victoria's situation, leaving out the more painful details, but making it clear that she needed work and a safe place to stay. Bring her out here tomorrow, Mrs. Richardson said. I will meet with her and see if we are a good fit. I have been struggling to keep up with everything since Sarah left, and Robert keeps telling me I need help, but I have been stubborn about it. She gave Austin a shrewd look. This is about more than just helping a stranger, is it not? Austin felt heat rise to his face. I do not know what you mean, madam. Of course you do not, she said with a knowing smile. Bring her tomorrow, we will talk. Austin rode back to San Angelo that evening, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. When he told Victoria about the meeting, she looked both hopeful and terrified. What if she does not like me? Victoria asked. What if I am not suitable? She will like you, Austin assured her. Just be yourself. That is more than enough. The next morning, Austin borrowed one of the ranch wagons and drove into town to collect Victoria. She was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, wearing the same gray dress but with her hair pinned up neatly. She had Austin's jacket folded over her arm. "I washed this for you," she said, handing it to him as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "It was the least I could do." "You did not have to do that," he said, but he was touched by the gesture. The ride out to the Double R Ranch took about 30 minutes. Victoria was quiet for most of the journey, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Austin tried to make conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area, but he could tell her mind was elsewhere, probably rehearsing what she would say to Mrs. Richardson. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill. It was a large, sturdy structure built from local limestone, with a wide porch and shuttered windows. Behind it were the barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the pastures beyond, and the whole scene had a peaceful, settled quality that Austin had come to appreciate. Mrs. Richardson was waiting on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She came down the steps as Austin brought the wagon to a stop, her expression friendly and welcoming. "You must be Miss Ashford," she said, offering her hand to Victoria as she climbed down from the wagon. "Elizabeth Richardson. Please come inside. I have coffee on the stove and we can talk." Austin watched as the two women disappeared into the house, feeling suddenly anxious. He knew this was important to Victoria, and he found that it had become important to him as well. He busied himself with unhitching the horses and checking on some of the other animals, but his mind was on the conversation happening inside the ranch house. Nearly an hour passed before the door opened, and Victoria emerged with Mrs. Richardson. Both women were smiling, and Austin felt relief wash over him. "Miss Ashford has agreed to come work for us," Mrs. Richardson announced. "She will start on Monday. That gives her the weekend to gather her things and say goodbye to Mrs. Patterson." Victoria looked over at Austin, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but these were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. "Thank you," she mouthed to him. The ride back to San Angelo was completely different from the ride out. Victoria was animated now, talking about everything Mrs. Richardson had shown her and explained about the job. She would have her own room in the ranch house, meals provided, and a salary that, while modest, was fair for the work she would be doing. "I can hardly believe it," she said as they neared town. "Just 3 days ago I thought my life was over. Now I have a job, a place to live, and a chance to start fresh. It feels like a miracle." "Not a miracle," Austin said. "Just people helping people. That is how it should be." Victoria turned to look at him, her expression serious. "You saved me, Austin. I want you to know that. If you had not stopped to help me that first night, I do not know what would have happened to me." "You would have figured something out," he said. "You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," she said, "but I am grateful I did not have to find out." That weekend passed in a blur of activity. Austin found himself making excuses to ride into town, ostensibly to help Victoria prepare for her move to the ranch, but really just to spend time with her. They took walks through San Angelo, and he showed her the general store, the church, the schoolhouse, and the other landmarks that made up the small town. Victoria was curious about everything, asking questions about the people and the history of the area. On Sunday, they attended church services together. It was a small congregation that met in a simple wooden building, but the people were welcoming. Several women approached Victoria after the service, introducing themselves and expressing pleasure at having a newcomer in their midst. Austin noticed that no one mentioned Vernon Hartley or asked awkward questions about why Victoria had come to San Angelo. Word had gotten around, as it always did in small towns, but these people were kind enough to let Victoria's fresh start actually be fresh. Monday morning arrived, and Austin drove Victoria out to the ranch with her few belongings. Everything she owned fit into a single carpet bag, a stark reminder of how much she had given up to come west. Mrs. Richardson met them at the door and immediately began showing Victoria around, explaining the routine and the various tasks that would need attention. Austin returned to his regular work, but he found it hard to concentrate. Knowing that Victoria was nearby, living and working in the same place he did, created a strange feeling in his chest that he could not quite name. It was not unpleasant, but it was unfamiliar and a little frightening in its intensity. Over the following weeks, Austin saw Victoria every day, though usually only in passing. She would be hanging laundry or working in the kitchen garden, and he would be heading out to the pastures or coming back dusty and tired from a day's work. They would exchange greetings, sometimes a few words about how the day was going, but there was rarely time for more than that. Yet, despite the brevity of these encounters, Austin found himself looking forward to them with an eagerness that surprised him. He would find excuses to walk past the kitchen window, or to stop by the well when he knew Victoria would be drawing water. And unless he was imagining things, she seemed to brighten when she saw him too, her smile becoming more genuine and reaching her eyes in a way it had not during those first difficult days. Mrs. Richardson noticed, of course. Women always notice these things. One evening, about a month after Victoria had started working at the ranch, Mrs. Richardson found Austin in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. "She is doing well," Mrs. Richardson said, and Austin knew immediately that she was not talking about the mare. "I am glad to hear it," he said, keeping his attention on the horse. "Victoria, I mean. She has settled in beautifully. Works hard, never complains, and she has a way with people that makes everything run more smoothly. Robert and I both agree that hiring her was one of the best decisions we have made." "That is good," Austin said. "You care about her," Mrs. Richardson continued. It was not a question. Austin stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. "Yes, madam, I do. Is that a problem?" "Why would it be a problem?" Mrs. Richardson asked. "She is a lovely young woman and you are a good man. I think you would be well suited to each other." She paused. "But I also think you are both being cautious, which is understandable given what she has been through. I just wanted to tell you that if you want to spend time with her properly, you have my blessing to invite her to social events. There is a dance in town next Saturday, for instance. I am sure she would enjoy going, and she deserves to have some fun after everything that has happened." Austin felt hope rise in his chest. "Do you think she would agree to go with me?" "There is only one way to find out," Mrs. Richardson said with a smile. That evening, after supper, Austin worked up the courage to knock on the kitchen door. Victoria answered, her sleeves rolled up and her hair slightly mussed from working over the stove. She looked beautiful. "Austin," she said, surprised, "is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," he said quickly. "I was wondering if I could talk to you for a moment." "Of course." She stepped out onto the back porch, closing the door behind her. The early December evening was cool but not uncomfortable, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Austin took a deep breath. He had faced down ornery bulls and wild horses without feeling this nervous, but asking Victoria to accompany him to a dance made his palms sweat. "There is a dance in town on Saturday," he said. "I was hoping you might agree to go with me." Victoria's face lit up with a smile that made his heart race. "I would like that very much." "Really?" He had not expected her to agree so readily. "Really," she confirmed. "I have not been to a dance in years. It sounds wonderful." They stood there for a moment, just smiling at each other, and Austin felt as though something significant had just shifted between them. It was no longer just a rancher helping out someone in need. This was something more, something that felt like the beginning of something real. Saturday arrived with clear skies and unusually warm weather for December. Austin spent extra time getting ready, washing thoroughly and putting on his best shirt and pants. Jack Morris teased him good-naturedly about his careful grooming, but Austin did not mind. He wanted to look his best for Victoria. When he went to collect her from the ranch house, he found her waiting in the parlor, and the sight of her took his breath away. She wore a deep blue dress that Mrs. Richardson must have helped her alter from something in the older woman's wardrobe. Her dark hair was pinned up with small flowers tucked into the arrangement, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. "You look beautiful," Austin said, the words coming out before he could worry about whether they were appropriate. Victoria blushed. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The drive into San Angelo was filled with easy conversation. Victoria talked about her work at the ranch and how much she enjoyed it, especially working in the garden and preparing meals. Austin told her about the new foal that had been born just 2 days earlier, describing how the little colt had struggled to his feet within an hour of birth, already curious about the world around him. The dance was being held in the town hall, a large room that had been decorated with pine boughs and candles. A small group of musicians, fiddle, guitar, and a man with a harmonica, provided lively music that had people clapping and stomping their feet. The room was crowded with townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area, everyone dressed in their finest and ready to enjoy an evening of entertainment. Austin led Victoria onto the dance floor, acutely aware of her hand in his. He was not the most skilled dancer, but he knew the basic steps, and Victoria followed his lead easily. They moved together through reels and waltzes, sometimes laughing when they stumbled, other times falling into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Between dances, they stood at the refreshment table drinking punch and watching the other dancers. Several people approached to introduce themselves to Victoria, and Austin noticed how graciously she handled each interaction, remembering names and asking thoughtful questions. She had a gift for making people feel comfortable, and he could see why Mrs. Richardson valued her so highly. As the evening wore on, Austin found himself wanting to keep Victoria close, to protect her from the curious stares and occasional whispered comments. He knew that some people were gossiping about her, about the failed wedding and her current situation. But Victoria seemed oblivious to it, or at least determined not to let it affect her enjoyment of the evening. During a slower dance, Austin pulled her a little closer, and she rested her head against his shoulder. They moved in silence for a few moments before Victoria spoke, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "You remember what I said that first night? About warmth feeling like a distant memory." "I remember," Austin said. "I do not feel that way anymore," she said, lifting her head to look at him. "Thanks to you, I feel warm again. I feel alive." Austin's heart hammered in his chest. "Victoria, I need you to know that what I feel for you, it is not pity. It is not just wanting to help someone in need. It is more than that." "I know," she said simply. "I feel it too." They stared at each other for a long moment, the music and the crowd fading into the background. Austin wanted to kiss her right there in front of everyone, but he also knew that Victoria deserved to have her reputation protected. She had been through enough without giving the gossips more fuel for their fires. "Can I court you properly?" he asked, "with everyone knowing my intentions?" "I would like that very much," Victoria said, her eyes shining. From that night on, Austin and Victoria were inseparable whenever work allowed. They took walks on Sunday afternoons, sometimes riding out to see different parts of the ranch or exploring the area around San Angelo. Austin showed her places he loved: a creek where cottonwood trees provided shade in summer, a rocky outcropping that offered views for miles in every direction, a meadow where wildflowers would bloom come spring. Victoria told him more about her life, about her parents and the happy childhood that had been cut too short. She spoke of her dreams and fears, her hopes for the future. Austin shared his own stories, talking about growing up on a small farm in East Texas before drought had driven his family off the land. He had been on his own since he was 18, working various ranches and learning everything he could about cattle and horses. "I always figured I would just be a hired hand my whole life," Austin admitted one afternoon as they sat by the creek. "I never thought much about settling down, starting a family. It seemed like something other men did, men who had more to offer." "And now?" Victoria asked. "Now I cannot stop thinking about it," he said honestly, "but only if it is with you." Victoria reached over and took his hand. "I came west looking for a husband, for a home and family. I thought I had found it with Vernon, even though I had never met him. But I was wrong. What I have found with you is so much better than anything I could have imagined. You saw me at my lowest point, and you treated me with kindness and respect. You gave me warmth when I had forgotten what it felt like. How could I not fall in love with you?" Austin's breath caught. "You love me." "I do," Victoria said simply. "I know it has only been a few months, and maybe it is too soon to say such things, but I cannot pretend otherwise. I love you, Austin Sawyer." He leaned in and kissed her then, a gentle kiss that spoke of promise and devotion. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I love you too," Austin said. "I think I have loved you since that first night when you stood there shivering and said warmth felt like a distant memory. I wanted to spend the rest of my life making sure you never felt that way again." They talked about the future then, about what it might look like. Austin admitted that he had been saving money, hoping one day to have enough to buy his own piece of land. It was not much yet, but he was a good worker and Mr. Richardson paid fairly. "It will not be easy," Austin warned. "Starting a ranch from nothing, it takes years of hard work and sacrifice. There would not be much comfort at first." "I do not need comfort," Victoria said firmly. "I need purpose and partnership. I want to build something with you, Austin. I want to create a life together." Over the next few months, their relationship deepened. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson were openly supportive, treating Victoria and Austin like the couple they were becoming. The other ranch hands teased Austin good-naturedly, but were respectful toward Victoria. Even the townspeople of San Angelo, who had initially viewed Victoria with curiosity and some suspicion, came to accept her as she proved herself to be hardworking and genuine. Winter gave way to spring, and the Texas landscape transformed. The meadows burst into color with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. The cattle grew fat on the new grass, and the ranch bustled with activity as calves were born and branded. Victoria worked tirelessly in the house and garden, and Austin noticed how she had begun to suggest improvements and efficiencies that Mrs. Richardson gratefully implemented. One evening in late April, Austin asked Mr. Richardson if he could speak with him privately. They sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. "Sir, I want to ask permission to marry Victoria," Austin said, his heart pounding. "I know I do not have much to offer her right now, but I am a hard worker and I am saving money. I will take care of her, provide for her, spend my life making sure she is happy." Robert Richardson smiled. "Austin, you are one of the best men I have ever had the privilege of knowing. Victoria would be lucky to have you, just as you would be lucky to have her. You have my blessing, and I know you have Elizabeth's as well." "Thank you, sir," Austin said, relief flooding through him. "In fact," Richardson continued, "I have been thinking about this for a while now. I own a section of land on the eastern edge of my property, about 300 acres. It is good grazing land with a creek running through it. I would like to sell it to you at a fair price, and I am willing to take payments over time. It would be a good start for your own ranch." Austin stared at him in shock. "Sir, I cannot accept such generosity." "It is not generosity, it is business," Richardson said firmly. "You are a good rancher, Austin. You have a solid head on your shoulders and a strong work ethic. I would rather have you as a neighbor than a stranger. And besides, my wife would be heartbroken if Victoria moved away. This way, you two can build your own place but still be close enough to visit regularly." Austin felt emotion well up in his throat. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," Richardson suggested. "Talk it over with Victoria, then let me know." That Sunday, Austin took Victoria back to the creek where they had first confessed their love. The cottonwood trees were thick with new leaves, providing dappled shade, and the water burbled over smooth stones. Birds sang in the branches above them, and the air smelled of grass and wildflowers. Austin had been nervous all morning, the small ring he had purchased in San Angelo burning a hole in his pocket. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy, but it was the best he could afford, and he hoped it would be enough. "Victoria," he began, then stopped and took her hands in his. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You came into my world when I did not even know I was looking for something, and you changed everything. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting, to have a future that means more than just the next job or the next paycheck." Victoria's eyes were already shining with tears. "Austin, let me finish," he said gently. "I know your first experience with marriage proposals did not go well. I know Vernon Hartley hurt you and made you doubt whether anyone could truly value you for who you are. But I see you, Victoria. I see your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your courage. I see the way you make everyone around you better just by being yourself, and I want to spend the rest of my life seeing you, loving you, building a life with you." He dropped to one knee, pulling the ring from his pocket. "Victoria Ashford, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Austin, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was pulling him to his feet and kissing him, laughing and crying at the same time. They held each other there by the creek, and Austin felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was what he had been missing all those years. This connection, this love, this feeling of coming home. When they finally pulled apart, Austin told her about Mr. Richardson's offer. Victoria's eyes widened as he described the land and the opportunity to start their own ranch. "It would be hard work," he warned again. "We would have to build everything from the ground up. A house, barns, corrals. It could take years before we are truly established." "I am not afraid of hard work," Victoria said. "And besides, we would be doing it together. That makes all the difference." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, already making plans and dreaming out loud. When they told the Richardsons their news, Elizabeth cried with happiness and insisted on hosting the wedding at the ranch. Robert shook Austin's hand firmly and welcomed him to the family, then immediately began discussing the details of the land sale. The wedding took place on a beautiful Saturday in June. The ceremony was held outside, under the same cottonwood trees where Austin had proposed. A minister from San Angelo performed the service, and nearly everyone from town attended, along with all the ranch hands and neighboring ranchers. Victoria wore a new dress that Mrs. Richardson and several other women had spent weeks sewing. A beautiful cream-colored gown with lace details, and a long train. As Austin watched Victoria walk toward him on Mr. Richardson's arm, his own father having passed away years before, he felt his eyes sting with tears. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and she was choosing him. She was choosing this life, this future they would build together. The vows they spoke were traditional, but Austin meant every word with an intensity that shook him. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parted them. These were not just words. They were a sacred promise, a commitment he intended to keep for the rest of his life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Austin he could kiss his bride, the crowd erupted in cheers. Austin cupped Victoria's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, tasting the salt of her happy tears, feeling the warmth of her smile against his lips. The celebration that followed was joyful and raucous. Tables had been set up outside laden with food that the women of San Angelo had prepared. There was dancing and music, laughter and toasts. Jack Morris gave a speech that had everyone howling with laughter, recounting stories of Austin's early days at the ranch when he had not quite known which end of a cow was which. Mrs. Richardson cried through her own speech about how Victoria had become like a daughter to her, and how blessed they all were to have witnessed this love story. As the evening turned to night and lanterns were lit around the yard, Austin and Victoria slipped away from the crowd for a few moments of privacy. They stood together in the shadows, his arms around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Victoria said. "Do you remember that first night when I said warmth felt like a distant memory I could never forget?" Austin said. "I was so cold then, inside and out. I felt like I would never be warm again, never feel anything but the emptiness of being unwanted and alone." She lifted her head to look at him, and even in the dim light he could see the love shining in her eyes. "You gave me back my warmth, Austin. You made me feel alive again. You showed me what love really means." "We did that for each other," Austin said, pulling her closer. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was just going through the motions before you came into my life. Now everything has meaning and purpose." They stood there holding each other, listening to the music and laughter from the party, both of them marveling at how completely their lives had changed in such a short time. The next morning, they moved into the small cabin that Austin had built on their new land with help from Mr. Richardson and the other ranch hands. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was sturdy and weatherproof, with a good stone fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light. Victoria had sewn curtains and helped Austin build simple furniture. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Those first months of marriage were a time of intense work and deep joy. Austin spent long days clearing land, building corrals and a small barn, and purchasing their first cattle with money he had saved and a loan from Mr. Richardson. Victoria worked alongside him whenever she could, helping with the heavy labor and managing their small household. She planted a garden that flourished in the rich soil near the creek, providing them with vegetables throughout the summer and into the fall. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of married life. Austin discovered that Victoria sang softly to herself while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. Victoria learned that Austin was quieter in the mornings, preferring to ease into the day with coffee and silence before the work began. They discovered they both loved watching the stars at night, lying on a blanket in the grass and trying to identify constellations. There were challenges, of course. The work was back-breaking, and there were times when they collapsed into bed too exhausted to do more than hold each other. Money was tight as they poured everything into building up the ranch. One of their first calves died despite their best efforts to save it, and Victoria cried while Austin held her, both of them mourning the loss. But through it all, their love deepened and strengthened. They were partners in the truest sense, sharing the burdens and the triumphs equally. When Austin threw his back out trying to move a heavy beam, Victoria took over the physical labor without complaint, then spent her evenings rubbing liniment into his sore muscles. When Victoria came down with a fever, Austin sat by her bedside for 2 days straight, bathing her forehead with cool cloths and coaxing her to drink water and broth. Their first winter in the cabin was harsh, with temperatures dropping well below freezing and ice coating everything. But they had prepared well, stockpiling firewood and preserving food from the garden. On the coldest nights, they would huddle together under quilts that Mrs. Richardson had given them as a wedding gift, telling stories and making plans for the spring. "You ever regret it?" Austin asked one night as wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows. "Marrying me, I mean. Taking on this hard life when you could have stayed comfortable working at the Richardson Ranch." Victoria propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her expression serious. "Austin Sawyer, I have never regretted a single moment with you. Yes, this life is hard, but it is ours. We are building something real and lasting, and I get to do it with the man I love. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just want you to be happy," he said. "I am happy," she insisted. "Happier than I have ever been. Do not doubt that." Spring brought new life to their ranch. The cattle they had purchased the previous fall gave birth to healthy calves. Victoria's garden began to sprout, promising an abundant harvest. Austin and Victoria worked from dawn to dusk, but they did it with joy, seeing their dreams slowly becoming reality. In May, Victoria began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she had eaten, but when the symptoms persisted for weeks, Mrs. Richardson took her aside during a visit and asked her some pointed questions. Victoria's face flushed with realization and hope. That evening, she told Austin they were going to have a baby. He stared at her in shock for a long moment, then swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and told him to be careful. They stood there in their small cabin, holding each other and crying happy tears, overwhelmed by the miracle of it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Victoria struggled with morning sickness for the first few months. Austin became even more protective, trying to take on all the heavy work himself, but Victoria insisted on pulling her weight as much as she safely could. She continued to tend the garden and cook their meals, though she let Austin handle the cattle and the more strenuous tasks. As her belly grew round with their child, Austin would sometimes place his hand there and feel the baby moving. It filled him with a sense of wonder and responsibility. He was going to be a father. He was going to have a family, something he had never really allowed himself to dream about before meeting Victoria. They spent the long summer evenings sitting on the porch they had built, watching the sun set over their land and talking about the future. What would they name the baby? What kind of parents did they want to be? How would they balance the demands of the ranch with the needs of a child? "I want our children to know they are loved," Victoria said one evening, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I want them to grow up feeling safe and valued the way I felt before my parents died. I want them to have the kind of childhood that makes them strong and confident." "They will," Austin promised. "We will make sure of it." In late December, just as the year was turning, Victoria went into labor. Austin rode frantically to the Richardson Ranch to fetch Mrs. Richardson and the midwife from town. The next 12 hours were the longest of Austin's life. He paced outside the bedroom, occasionally hearing Victoria cry out and wanting desperately to go to her, but being told firmly by Mrs. Richardson to stay put and let the women do their work. Finally, just after dawn on a cold December morning, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Richardson emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy baby boy." "And Victoria is fine. exhausted but fine. Austin rushed into the room to find Victoria propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and as Austin approached, she pulled the fabric back to reveal a small red face with eyes squeezed shut and a rosebud mouth. "Austin, meet your son," Victoria said softly. Austin sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's soft cheek. His son. His and Victoria's son. The emotion that welled up in him was so powerful he could barely breathe. "He is perfect," Austin whispered. "You are amazing. Thank you for this gift." They named him William Robert Sawyer, after Victoria's father and Mr. Richardson. Little William was a good baby, crying only when he was hungry or needed changing. Victoria took to motherhood naturally, and Austin found himself marveling at her patience and tenderness with their son. The early months with a newborn were exhausting. William needed to be fed frequently, and Victoria was often up multiple times during the night. Austin took on even more of the ranch work, determined to let Victoria rest as much as possible. But despite the fatigue, they were both happier than they had ever been. Their little family felt complete and perfect. As William grew, the ranch continued to flourish. Austin had developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle, and he was able to slowly expand their herd. They hired their first ranch hand, a young man named Thomas who was hardworking and eager to learn. This gave Austin more time to spend with Victoria and William, something he treasured. William took his first steps on a warm spring day when he was nearly a year old. Austin and Victoria watched with delight and pride as their son toddled across the cabin floor, his face lit up with a huge smile. They clapped and cheered, and William laughed, pleased with his accomplishment. "He is going to be running before we know it," Victoria said, scooping William up and covering his face with kisses. "Then we are in trouble," Austin joked. "I can barely keep up with him as it is." That summer, they decided to expand the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Austin and Thomas did most of the work, with help from Mr. Richardson and some of the other ranchers. Victoria oversaw the project, making suggestions and decisions about the layout. When it was finished, their home felt spacious and comfortable, ready to accommodate the growing family they both hoped to have. 2 years after William was born, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline. She had Victoria's dark hair and Austin's eyes, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. William was initially uncertain about the new baby who took up so much of his mother's attention, but Victoria was patient, involving him in caring for his sister and helping him feel important. The years passed in a blur of activity and love. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more cattle, built additional outbuildings, and purchased another 100 acres adjacent to their original property. Austin's reputation as a skilled rancher spread throughout the region, and he was often asked for advice by neighboring ranchers. Victoria became known for her hospitality and her involvement in the San Angelo community. She helped organize church socials and school events, always making sure that newcomers to the area felt welcomed. She never forgot what it was like to arrive alone and afraid in a strange place, and she made it her mission to ensure no one else had to feel that way. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the cattle. Caroline was more adventurous, always exploring and getting into mischief. 3 years after Caroline, Victoria gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Samuel. The cabin was suddenly full of noise and chaos, and Austin and Victoria could not have been happier. As the children grew, Austin and Victoria made sure to tell them the story of how they had met. William, now old enough to understand, listened with wide eyes as his mother described arriving in San Angelo alone, cold and frightened. "Your father saved me," Victoria told her children. "He did not know me, had no reason to help me, but he saw someone in need and he acted. That is the kind of person I want you all to be, someone who helps others simply because it is the right thing to do." "But Mama," Caroline piped up, "Papa said you saved him too." "How did you save him if he was the one who found you?" Victoria smiled and looked over at Austin, who was sitting nearby whittling a toy horse for the twins. "I saved him by loving him," she said simply, "and he saved me by loving me back. Sometimes that is what people need most, just someone to love them and believe in them." The children seemed to accept this answer, though Austin suspected they would understand it better as they got older. He caught Victoria's eye and smiled, remembering that cold November evening so many years ago when he had offered his jacket to a shivering bride, and she had said warmth felt like a distant memory. Time continued its steady march. William turned 18 and took on more responsibility at the ranch, proving himself to be every bit as capable as his father. Caroline, at 16, had become a beautiful young woman who helped her mother run the household and was pursued by half the young men in the county, much to Austin's consternation. The twins, at 13, were still getting into trouble but showed promise as ranchers. Austin and Victoria were in their 40s now, their faces lined from years of sun and work, their hair showing touches of gray. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that first night, the cowboy who had offered his jacket and the bride who had needed warmth. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Austin and Victoria sat on their porch watching the stars. This had become their ritual, a quiet time to reconnect after busy days filled with the demands of ranch and family. "You ever think about that first night?" Austin asked, though he already knew the answer. "All the time," Victoria said, taking his hand. "I think about how lost I felt, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you appeared, this kind stranger who asked nothing of me but gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Austin said. "A home, a family, a purpose. You made me believe I could be more than just a drifter working other people's land." "We made each other better," Victoria said. "That is what love does, I think. It does not complete you because you were always complete. But it makes you want to be the best version of yourself." Austin pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A breeze rustled through the cottonwood trees. Inside the house, they could hear one of the twins calling out in his sleep, then settling again. This was their life, built from nothing but determination and love. This was what they had created together, two people who had found each other when they both needed saving. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Mr. Richardson died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, and Austin and Victoria mourned him deeply. He had been more than a friend and mentor. He had been like a father to both of them. Mrs. Richardson followed him 3 years later, and Victoria cried for days, grieving the woman who had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. William married a schoolteacher from San Angelo named Margaret, and they gave Austin and Victoria their first grandchildren, 2 boys in quick succession. Caroline chose a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Henry who treated her with the respect and love she deserved. The twins showed no signs of settling down yet, too busy enjoying their youth and the freedom of the frontier. Austin and Victoria grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch, but a family filled with love and respect. Their children and grandchildren were evidence of the life they had created, proof that taking a chance on love, even when circumstances seemed impossible, could lead to something beautiful. On a warm evening in June, when Austin was 52 and Victoria was 49, they took one of their customary walks down to the creek. The cottonwood trees were thick and full, providing deep shade. The water burbled over the same stones it had flowed over for decades. Birds sang their evening songs. They sat in the same spot where Austin had proposed so many years before, and he put his arm around her shoulders. Victoria leaned into him, fitting against his side as perfectly as she had the first time. "If you could go back," Austin said quietly, "back to that day you arrived in San Angelo, would you change anything?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. "I would not change meeting you, not for anything in the world. But I wish I had not had to go through the pain and humiliation of Vernon's rejection to get there." "Maybe it had to happen that way," Austin mused. "Maybe you had to be in that exact place at that exact time for us to find each other." "Maybe," Victoria agreed. "I used to be so angry at Vernon for what he did. But now I just feel grateful. His cruelty led me to your kindness. His rejection opened the door to your love. In a strange way, I owe him a debt, though I hope I never have to see him again to pay it." Austin laughed. "Last I heard, he lost his ranch to gambling debts and left the state. I do not think you need to worry about running into him." "Good," Victoria said firmly. Then she turned to look at Austin, her dark eyes still as beautiful as they had been at 24. "Do you know what I am most grateful for?" "What?" "That you saw me," she said simply. "Not the wedding dress or the situation. You saw me, the person inside, and you thought I was worth saving. That is a gift I can never repay." "You have repaid it every day," Austin said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every smile, every laugh, every moment of love and partnership. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, Victoria. You took my simple offer of a jacket and turned it into a lifetime of warmth." She reached up to cup his face in her hands, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheeks. "I love you, Austin Sawyer. I have loved you from almost the beginning, and I will love you until my very last breath." "And I love you," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "You are my heart, Victoria. Everything good in my life comes back to you." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. They had been given a second chance at life, both of them, and they had made the most of it. From a moment of despair and cold had come warmth and love that had lasted decades. From a simple act of kindness had grown a family and a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lifetimes. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Austin and Victoria made their way back to the house they had built together. Inside, they could hear their grandchildren playing, William's boys who were spending the week with them. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, a beautiful reminder of everything they had created. That night, lying in bed with Victoria's head resting on his chest, Austin thought about that cold November evening so long ago. He thought about the frightened young woman in a wedding dress who had said warmth felt like a distant memory. He thought about how a simple decision to offer his jacket had changed both their lives completely. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness, though he was not sure if Victoria was still awake. "For what?" came her sleepy reply. "For saying yes. To all of it. The ranch, the children, this life. For trusting me when you had no reason to." Victoria pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "I would say yes 1,000 times over. You gave me back my life, Austin. You gave me warmth when I thought I would be cold forever. How could I do anything but love you?" They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. True love, built on a foundation of kindness, respect, and unwavering devotion. It had sustained them through hard times and celebrated with them in good times. It had given them children and grandchildren, a successful ranch, and a place in their community. More than that, it had given them each other, and that was the greatest gift of all. The years continued to pass peacefully. Austin and Victoria grew old together, watching their children build their own successful lives and their grandchildren grow from babies to young adults. The ranch continued to prosper under William's capable management, though Austin still helped out when he could, unable to completely give up the work that had defined so much of his life. When Austin was 63, he suffered a heart episode that scared them all. Victoria sat by his bedside in the doctor's office in San Angelo, holding his hand and trying not to show how frightened she was. But Austin recovered, and the doctor told him he needed to take things easier, let the younger generation handle more of the physical labor. "I am not ready to be put out to pasture yet," Austin grumbled, but he followed the doctor's orders, knowing that Victoria would never forgive him if he did not. They had more time together, time that they might not have had if Austin had been stubborn. They took slow walks around the property, Victoria supporting him when he grew tired. They spent long evenings on the porch, telling stories to their grandchildren about the old days, about how the West had changed from the rough frontier of their youth to the more settled civilization it was becoming. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together family and friends from across the region. The house was filled with laughter and love, with stories and toasts to the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. William stood to speak, his voice strong and clear. 40 years ago, my father saw someone in need and he acted. That simple choice, that moment of kindness, led to everything we have today. It led to this family, this ranch, this community of people who love and support each other. Papa, Mama, you taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. You taught us that hard work and dedication can build something lasting. You taught us to be kind to strangers because you never know whose life you might change. Thank you for being the parents and grandparents we needed. Thank you for showing us what true love looks like. There was not a dry eye in the room as William sat down. Austin looked at Victoria, and she looked back at him, both of them overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had been given. 40 years, Austin said quietly, leaning close so only she could hear. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I, Victoria said, kissing his cheek. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it led us here, and I would not change a thing. As the party continued around them, Austin thought back to that young man he had been, the one who had worked hard but never really thought about the future beyond the next job. He thought about the choices he had made, some good and some less so, that had led him to that train station on that particular November evening. He thought about the courage it had taken to approach a stranger and offer help, and how easily he might have walked past, too busy with his own concerns to notice someone else's pain. But he had noticed. He had acted, and that choice had given him everything. Victoria's thoughts ran along similar lines. She thought about the young woman she had been, desperate and frightened, convinced that her life was over before it had really begun. She thought about how close she had come to despair, to giving up entirely. And then Austin had appeared, offering not just his jacket but his kindness, his respect, his willingness to help someone who had nothing to offer in return. He had saved her life in every way that mattered, and she had saved his right back. As they grew older still, into their 70s, Austin and Victoria slowed down considerably. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, refined and purified by decades of partnership. They spent their days mostly at home now, tending Victoria's garden which she refused to give up, sitting on the porch watching the world go by, and enjoying visits from their ever-growing family. Caroline had given them 4 grandchildren. The twins had finally married and started families of their own, and William's boys had children now as well, making Austin and Victoria great-grandparents. The house was often filled with little ones, and nothing made them happier than watching the youngest generation play and grow. One evening in late autumn, as the air turned cool and the leaves on the cottonwood trees began to turn gold, Victoria and Austin sat on their porch wrapped in blankets. Victoria had been feeling tired lately, sleeping more than usual, and Austin worried about her constantly. "You remember," Victoria said softly, "that first night, when you gave me your jacket?" "I remember everything about that night," Austin said. "I was so cold," Victoria continued. "Not just in my body, but in my soul. I felt like I would never be warm again, like happiness and hope were things that existed for other people but not for me." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes still bright despite her age. "But then you came, and everything changed. You gave me warmth, Austin, not just that night but every night since then. You kept me warm for more than 50 years. Austin felt tears prick his eyes. "And you kept me warm too. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning and be grateful." "Promise me something," Victoria said, gripping his hand. "Anything. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not fall back into that cold place. Promise me you will remember the warmth we shared and let it sustain you." "Victoria, do not talk like that," Austin said, his voice breaking. "We are both old, my love. We have to face reality." She squeezed his hand. "I am not afraid of what comes next. We have had more happiness than most people ever dream of, but I need to know you will be all right." "I will never be all right without you," Austin said honestly. "But I promise I will remember. I will hold onto the warmth we built together, and I will not let it fade." Victoria passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later, on a cold November night remarkably similar to the one when Austin had first seen her all those years ago. Austin woke to find her gone, still and peaceful beside him, and the pain that filled his chest was like nothing he had ever experienced. She was his partner, his love, his reason for everything, and now she was gone. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Victoria had touched so many lives with her kindness and generosity, and now they all came to pay their respects. Austin stood between his children, receiving condolences, but he felt numb, as though he was watching everything from a great distance. In the weeks that followed, Austin struggled. The house felt empty without Victoria's presence, without her humming as she worked in the kitchen, without her laughter and her gentle teasing. He found himself sitting for hours on the porch, wrapped in the same blankets they had shared, remembering. William and Margaret moved into the house to keep Austin company, and while he appreciated their concern, it was not the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. But slowly, as winter gave way to spring, Austin began to find his footing again. He remembered his promise to Victoria, to not fall back into that cold place. He forced himself to get up each day, to take walks around the property they had built together, to spend time with his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He told stories about Victoria, keeping her memory alive for the younger generations who had not known her as long. He described how brave she had been, arriving in a strange place with nothing but hope and determination. He talked about her kindness, her strength, her unwavering love. He wanted them all to know what an extraordinary woman she had been. On what would have been their 52nd wedding anniversary, Austin made his way down to the creek, to the spot where he had proposed all those years ago. It was harder to walk now, his legs not as steady as they once were, but he was determined. He carried with him a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind that Victoria had loved. He sat under the cottonwood trees, placing the flowers on the ground beside him, and he talked to Victoria as though she could hear him. "I miss you every moment of every day," he said to the wind, to the water, to the sky, "but I am keeping my promise. I am remembering the warmth. Our children are thriving. Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are healthy and happy. The ranch is successful and our name is respected throughout the region. We built something that will last long after we are both gone." He sat there for a long time, feeling the sun on his face, listening to the birds and the burbling creek. And in that moment, he felt something shift inside him. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but a warmth that had been missing since Victoria's death. The warmth of memory, of love that transcends death, of a life well lived and well loved. Austin lived another 3 years, long enough to see William's youngest grandson born, long enough to know that their legacy would continue. He spent his final days surrounded by family, telling stories and offering what wisdom he had accumulated over his long life. When Austin passed away on a warm summer evening, his family gathered around him. His last words were of Victoria, calling her name as though he could see her waiting for him. They buried him next to Victoria under the cottonwood trees by the creek, the place where they had first declared their love. The headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription that William had chosen. From cold to warmth, they found each other and built a lifetime of love. Years turned into decades, and the story of Austin and Victoria Sawyer became legend in Tom Green County. Parents told their children about the cowboy who had offered his jacket to a cold bride, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into one of the great love stories of the region. The ranch they had built remained in the family, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear, warmth over cold. And on November evenings, when the air turned crisp and cold, people in San Angelo would sometimes remark that it was the kind of night when a cowboy might offer his jacket to someone in need, and in doing so, change both their lives forever. For that was the lesson that Austin and Victoria had taught through their lives and their love. That kindness costs nothing but can mean everything. That warmth can be found even in the coldest places. And that true love, once found, never truly dies but lives on in the hearts and memories of those who witnessed it. The Sawyer Ranch continued to prosper for generations, but it was known not just for its cattle or its acreage, but for the love story that had founded it. Young couples who married would sometimes visit the graves under the cottonwood trees, asking for the blessing of a love as strong and lasting as Austin and Victoria had shared. The cabin that Austin and Victoria had first lived in still stood, preserved by their descendants as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors could see the simple rooms where they had started their life together, where William had been born, where a family had been forged from nothing but determination and devotion. In San Angelo, a plaque was eventually placed at the train station, commemorating Victoria's arrival and Austin's act of kindness. It served as a reminder to all who passed through that town of the power of compassion, the importance of seeing others in their need, and the beautiful things that can grow from a single moment of caring. The wedding dress that Victoria had worn that fateful November evening, the one she had been standing in when Austin first saw her, was preserved by Caroline and eventually donated to the County Historical Society. It became one of their most popular exhibits, a symbol of hope rising from despair, of endings that became beginnings. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Austen and Victoria was not in buildings or preserved artifacts, or even in the successful ranch that bore their name. It was in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren, and all the generations that followed. Values of kindness, hard work, integrity, and above all, love. They had shown that love was not just romance and passion, though they had shared both in abundance. Love was also partnership and perseverance. It was choosing someone every day, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. It was seeing someone at their worst and loving them anyway. It was offering warmth to someone who had forgotten what warmth felt like, and having that warmth return tenfold. The story of the cowboy and the cold bride became more than just a story. It became a lesson, a blueprint for how to live a life of meaning and purpose. It reminded people that everyone has value, that kindness matters, that love can conquer even the most difficult circumstances. And so the warmth that Austen had first offered Victoria on that cold November evening in 1884 continued to spread, touching lives and hearts more than a century later. It lived on in every act of kindness performed without expectation of reward, in every stranger helped without hesitation, in every couple who chose love over convenience, commitment over comfort. For in the end, that was what Austen and Victoria's story was really about. The transformative power of choosing to see and value another human being, and the beautiful things that can happen when two people decide to face the world together, keeping each other warm no matter how cold the winds might blow. Their love had started with a jacket offered on a train platform, with words about warmth feeling like a distant memory. But it had grown into something that generated its own warmth, a fire that had burned bright for more than 50 years, and whose embers continued to glow in the hearts of all who heard their story. And that, perhaps, was the true measure of a life well lived and a love worth remembering. That long after the individuals were gone, their impact remained, warming the world they had left behind and inspiring others to choose kindness, to offer help, to believe in love even when circumstances made it seem impossible. The cowboy and his bride had found each other in a moment of desperation and doubt, and from that unpromising beginning had built something that would outlast them both. They had proven that warmth need never be a distant memory, that it could be reclaimed and rekindled and shared, creating light and heat that would shine through the generations. A beacon of hope for all who needed reminding that love, true love, could still be found even in the coldest and most unlikely places.